Hey guys, it's Olivie Blake, and this is me not writing. My hair is away, so hopefully I won't be touching it. Partially it's away because it hasn't been cut in over a year, and it just is, I can't even deal with it. Where I guess that is a little bit of another petty grievance. Another grievance is that it's still very hot here. I'm like very emotionally ready for sweater weather. Like emotionally, that is where I am. I need to be in like a very large sweater, and it's too hot to do that. And I keep trying, but it's not working. So the mind over matter thing doesn't work with the weather, FYI. And on that note, I have a berry lemonade from Trader Joe's, which is a place that I love, as you probably know by now. And I'm wearing white after Labor Day because if the weather is going to feel exactly like it did before Labor Day, then I don't think that there are any rules. Also behind me is some sort of physics thing. I've heard the lecture 3 times now. It has something to do with force. It's a Hot Wheels track. Moving on. Let's see, in terms of books, this week I reread the first volume of the Chronicles of CHRESTOMANCI by Diana Wynne Jones, which is a book I really enjoyed when I was a kid. It's one of my favorites. I never read Diana Wynne Jones's full catalog because she's written a lot of books, and another sort of wizarding child came along in my life. So I'm kind of revisiting all that stuff. Like I've never read Howl's Moving Castle, for example, which is potentially her most famous work. One of. But yeah, I enjoyed it so much. It was so charming. I feel like that is really what's missing for me in terms of young adult children's fantasy. Not that I'm currently writing that, but I've just noticed that sometimes YA fantasy is very like, you know, it's stakes. It's extreme stakes. So like a 16-year-old needs to save the world. And in this story, it's more like, well, it's middle grade, so it's not YA, but it's more like, you know, 12-year-old is like grudgingly going to have to save the world because the adults are like too busy talking over him. So anyway, it was super charming. I loved it very much. If you don't, you know, if you were sort of looking for something to give you the feeling that a certain other wizarding book used to give you, you might find it with Diana Wynne Jones. I will also be rereading Dealing with Dragons by Patricia C. Reed, which I think that is a quartet, and that was one of my favorites when I was younger as well, so I'm looking forward to revisiting it. Just sort of as a follow-up from last week, you know, just if you have any reason to be upset with J.K. Rowling and kind of like still want to have that feeling of something comforting, where maybe we don't have to think so much about who the author is. Anyway, so now I'm reading Exciting Times by Nisha Dolan, which I had to look up how to pronounce that. It's kind of like Shirsa, where it's like, well, it's Irish, so it is like Shirsa, which is something I always mispronounce. Whenever I see Saoirse Ronan's name, I always say it in my head, Saoirse Ronan, and then correct myself. But anyway, it's very good. I actually prefer it. I'm only about halfway through, and it's very similar to Sally Rooney's work in that it's kind of like, it's a little bit scathing about certain things, but then kind of dances back from being openly critical. Well, that's how I would describe Sally Rooney, actually, is, you know, for her, it's more about the interior experience. And this narrator is she's very much scathing about Brexit, about, she's very radical. She is pro-communism, although she doesn't want to say it to her potential lovers. She's similar in the sense that she has sort of she's got a little bit of, you know, a sort of familiar insecurity. She's 22 and she sounds very much like a 22-year-old. I remember feeling that way at 22, that was just kind of like trying very hard to get everything right and nothing felt very natural. And if it did feel natural, you were like suspicious of it. But yeah, it's quite good. I'm enjoying it a lot. So if you like normal people or conversations with friends, then I think you will probably also like Exciting Times, which takes place in Hong Kong. So it kind of has the exploration of colonialism is very interesting. And so this month's spell read, Mexican Gothic, I had a really fun time with this. The discussion will have posted yesterday. It's always so weird for me talking about this that is in the future for me, but not you. So the discussion has already posted. I collaborated with Angela Gualtieri, and I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, so anyway, it was really fun. It was cool to have sort of a back and forth. We also brought in a lot of elements from last year's discussion. Last year we talked about Jane Eyre and Rebecca, and I think that Mexican Gothic is like the perfect follow-up because we're basically taking these same like literary constructs and the same themes and motifs, bringing them into not only contemporary mindset, but also a multicultural ideation of what Gothic can be, which was really, really interesting, especially because the author, Silvia Moreno Garcia, has said before, she's been really adamant that, you know, Mexican Gothic is horror. It has, like, gory aspects to it. It definitely follows a lot of the horror trademarks in terms of sensationalizing things, but it is also, it does have magical realism, which is something I'm not that familiar with. I did read some Latin American literature in school, and I think it's been sort of a while since I've actually revisited the idea of magical realism and what that actually means and where it comes from and what it's inspired by. So yeah, I think one of the best things, you know, that I noticed this year from purposely going out of my way to read more authors of color, and especially mix more authors of color into the S.P.E.L.L. curriculum, is just really understanding how Mexican Gothic is not white Gothic. It's not a classic Gothic tale that takes place in Mexico. It is influenced by Latin American literature, and I think that's very interesting, especially because the author, Moreno Garcia, comes from sort of a fantasy background. So yeah, it was really interesting. The conversation was really interesting. We also brought in a lot of topics about how Gothic literature is about voicelessness, and so there's always kind of this aspect of like a lost woman who's still there. Her voice is still there. The house is haunted by her. The man is haunted by her, which was just really interesting. So yeah, there's still plenty of time left in the month if you want to read the book. It's a fairly quick read. I mean, I really struggled to put it down. So yeah, so if you want to read it, please do. Please join the discussion. If you want to just join in because you've read Jane Eyre and Rebecca and you want to talk about that and see what we were talking about, go ahead. Okay, and then our topic for today is, we've got a writing topic, which we haven't had in a while. Hi, Olivie. Do you have any insight into how to actually translate a scene from your head onto paper? I'm someone who can almost play out a scene in my head entirely before I write it, so I know exactly what I want to happen, but my biggest hurdle is figuring out how to actually put it into words. And this is quite common, I think. I mean, for most of us, I think before we become writers, we are daydreamers. And so imagining something in our head and then trying to translate it into writing is a process that I think a lot of us come to deal with. And so I have two main pieces of advice that is going, you're right, it's not a new question. So I have answered it in pieces before, and I think what might be helpful if you want to see something in writing is my post on how I write a book, and basically part 2, the editing part, because what I think is important here is it's kind of like, I used to have this problem in high school. Just go with it. I used to have this problem in high school where if I knew what I wanted my like homecoming dress or prom dress to look like, then it was impossible to find a dress, because it was like there was this thing in my head and I couldn't find it in real life, and it was so frustrating and I would never find one. Versus sometimes I'd be like, I have no idea how I want to look, and then it's like the first thing that I pick up is like the perfect dress. So sometimes I actually tell myself to like stop. Sometimes I cut the daydream short, because I'm like, I don't want to envision it too clearly, because then I will always be disappointed by what I actually write down. And sometimes that is the case, which is why drafting I think is really important, and not expecting that, like, number one rule is do not expect that first draft to be a perfect rendition of how it played out in your head. Most likely it won't be the same thing. If you think about it, what plays in your head is kind of like a movie, right? And what you're writing is a book, and those are two different mediums. So what you're creating might feel like it turns out like stick figures when what was in your head was this very like detailed drawing. So basically drafting is very important, because the first thing you write down, probably not good. And I think it's actually best if the first thing you write down is purposely not very good. So if you just literally transcribe, like almost like it's a film script, what's in your head onto the page, just because if there are no words written down, then you definitely can't get a good draft in there. So even if it's just a skeleton of like, this happens, this happens, this happens, this person speaks, this person speaks, this person is here in this room, like you're literally just staging it, just writing that down. That first draft is just like you explaining back to yourself what has happened in your head. So definitely for me, it's a lot of just like action sentences. This thing happens, this thing happens. Don't worry about atmosphere because that's something you can finesse later. That's something you're not going to forget. That part. You are going to forget like maybe what exactly is happening and you want to get that down. So yeah, so your first draft will be very much, I always call it a skeleton draft because it's just not good. It's not something you'd want to send to people. I think you really just generally with writing have to become comfortable with the idea that the first draft is not perfect. You can aim for perfection, but the difficult thing, like the difficult thing is getting past your feeling that you're not going to get it right. And so if you kind of give yourself the room to do it wrong or just not right or not very good, you can go back and fix that. For me, that draft is not going to look like, actually, for me, that draft is never going to look exactly like it looked in my head, but I can still get something on the page that I can work with, that I can finesse into something that then becomes a full scene. So yeah, you just have to really lower your expectations and kind of accept the fact that what you see is not going to be what your audience sees. So while what I recommend is writing it down like in actual directives of like, as if you were telling your characters where to go, where to be, what to say, what's happening, and like they've never seen the script and it's just you telling them what they're doing. This happens. There's an explosion. We won't worry about how that happens. We'll explain it later. You know, and especially because when you're drafting, you also have to blend all these scenes together. That's stuff you don't want to have to worry about right now, especially if it's some sort of action scene or a love scene, which really is an action scene in terms of choreography. But I digress. I work with a 4-draft process. So everything I do is like the first draft is just about getting it out of my head and onto the page, which means that it's then a real thing that I can work with, that I can edit. The second draft is about like adding in everything that's missing. The third draft is about taking out what's too much or what's confusing and doing like the stylized just how things should sound. What can I do to make this more impactful? Especially stuff when it comes to like line breaks, I think are very important. Sometimes they're overused and sometimes they're really like they're very valuable. Dialogue tags are, a lot of my old work overuses dialogue tags where I explain what people are actively doing while they're talking versus when I could have just let the conversation sort of carry itself out. That's my like stage 3 process. And then step 4 is just typos and stuff. So yeah, hopefully that helps you. Yeah, if you're seeing it like a movie, then write it out like a movie script. You can always turn that into something more prosy. So yeah, we don't have very much going on today. I hope you guys are all doing well. Motivation is pretty like weird right now. Other things, my mom has finished. The answer you are looking for is yes. Her favorite stories, she said she couldn't pick a favorite story, but she seemed very adamant about Stone's Throw. She wanted to talk to me about that one a lot. And also the Immortality Project, although she did say that it made her feel claustrophobic while they were scuba diving. So there's my mother's review. She did say that she cried reading Pars Fortuna, which makes sense. And then she laughed during the Immortality Project, and apparently my stepdad found all of this very bewildering. I did say I was going to do a giveaway of this book and also La Petite Mort. So that was something I wanted to do for Halloween, which means that I should probably put that on my to-do list and really pay attention to what day it is now. So we've got some time, but that's probably coming up soon. It will probably be US only, I'm sorry, but I can't really afford international shipping. Someday, when I have a lot more financial backing behind me. So anyway, I think that's it. So this has been me, Olivie Blake, not writing, and I'll see you next week.